easy to forget.
Well, because I'm used to like Teams or things like that. That's what we do. So Zoom, I'm not that familiar with, and I had no idea of how, processing the video and all of that. I was.
Got it. Well, the recording is started, so you're good. You're good. Oh, I started it too soon. I should have not started it. Should I pause?
Okay, so thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our next session of our professional learning series. So the session that we're going to do focus on tonight is, there we go. So the session we're focused on this evening is the one will be the first of our 5-part sessions, dealing with really thinking of ways to integrate the scaffold and also integrate content and language, and think about different ways to do that. So our session for tonight is shifting the instructional paradigm for the WIDA 2020 alignment, and it's the first of our 5-part series. And so we have our illustrious Georgia TESOL president, Dr. Elizabeth Webb, with us to sort of lead the session. So just to kind of give, for those of you who have not attended one of the Georgia TESOL workshops before. So we usually, for this session, for this 5-part series, it's we're going to be in the next, will be held the next 5 today and then the next 4 Thursdays in a row. But usually we have workshops twice a month, dealing with a lot of different issues related to working with English language learners. And some and these are all listed on our website. In some cases, the workshops are open. The professional learning series are open to the public. In other cases, they may be restricted to Georgia TESOL members only. So that might be one motivation among others to become a Georgia TESOL member. And we get lots of benefits because of that. What we started doing also this semester is, this year, is if you sign up and you attend the professional learning series, that you receive a certificate of participation, in case you may need that for your school districts or for your CV or things like that. You will also, as Dr. Webb mentioned, you will receive these slides and then a link to the recording afterwards. And then we will have kind of a break in July, and then we will continue the learning series in August. So just to kind of provide you with a bit of an overview of the sessions that we've had. So these are just kind of highlighting some of the sessions that we have held and that we will hold once school starts back in the fall. This year, our professional learning series this year, we tried to focus a lot of the sessions on empowerment and empowering stakeholders in different ways. So empowering students, empowering parents, and empowering the community, and making kind of connections between all of these stakeholders and different ways of doing so. And then, as I mentioned, for this week and the next 4 Thursdays, we will have part of our professional learning series will focus on ways to integrate content and language in different ways. So, Dr. Webb, over to you.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate that introduction. And hey, Sasha, I just saw you this afternoon and you're already back in your... Sasha and I were in a meeting earlier today here at the Instructional Support Center. I stayed late at work because I didn't dare go across Atlanta in bad traffic. All right, let me share my screen here. Here we go. All right. I hate sharing my screen because I think when I share my screen on Zoom, oh, no, I can see you guys at least a little bit. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, you get me tonight because Landa has been sick, and she also has a graduating senior this year. So you just can imagine, when you've been ill and you've also got a graduating senior. I'm trying to put y'all's picture somewhere where I can, let's see here. I can see you guys, but not have to, there we go. That's a little better. So I'm jumping in for Landa, but do keep her in your thoughts, as both joyful and also, you know, just send her good positive energy as she's making a recovery from an illness. And she also has a wonderful, accomplished 12th grader who's just finished up in his distinguished high school career. So that's a great, exciting, but very busy time for her. So the focus today is kind of setting the stage for our series in June. And we do have our Georgia Department of Education folks and also our illustrious Dr. Karen Terrell talking in specific about the WIDA standards and looking at language and content integration across the content areas. So this is going to be a really good series, and we're trying to just kind of get your juices flowing as we talk about, you know, shifting the instructional paradigm. So as I already mentioned, you know, you guys got stuck with me tonight instead of with Landa. Sorry about that, but I will do the best I can. And I will say, here's our learning target. I had one and then I added some and I didn't change the headline. So it should be learning targets, but that just goes to show you, we learn language to accomplish purposes. And it's never, and we rarely are perfect. So we don't need to go for perfection. We need to go for communication, which is an important principle that we'll be talking about today. So we're going to talk about identifying the important shifts in the WIDA 2020 English Language Development Framework, reflecting on current practices, and determining what opportunities we see to use strategies to integrate language and content, which to me is one of the biggest shifts and the biggest challenges. So as we move forward with those, I want to ask you guys what the shift is. And Brian, I'm going to get you to help me out with, you know, folks who comment in the chat. You know, what's the shift? I pulled this from the WIDA 2020 English Language Development Framework. Multilingual learners. I added, I embellished a little bit, maybe because I made it look like a definition, but they put it in as a text. It's a noun. All students who interact in languages in addition to English on a regular basis includes students who are commonly referred to as Ls, DLLs, SIFE, LTELs, English learners with disability, gifted and talented, EAL. What's the shift? We don't have that many folks with us. If you want to hop off mute, what's the shift? What's the shift from, to, and to?
From English learners to multilingual learners, ELs to MLs.
Exactly, ELs to MLs. ELs to MLs, and WIDA did this because they intentionally are taking that opportunity to focus a light on the language as asset, So it's a big shift. Yet I find that in the field it's a smidge confusing because we don't get to focus on all multilingual learners. We just get to focus on the ones who are English language learners, who are in the process of acquiring English by a certain definition. So I love the shift, but you know, sometimes it makes us gives us a little bit of problems with semantics and definitions. But here's an important thing to keep in mind. Multilingual learners focusing on languages as an asset. All right, what's the shift here? 4 components of the ELD standards: the ELD standards statements, the key language uses, the language expectations, and the proficiency level descriptors. This is a big picture, but what's different here than in the past? What's different here than, say, in the 2012 amplification? What did we talk about in 2012? If we go back, I think that we did not have the language expectations goals for content-driven language learning in their present, at least definitely not in the present form. We had different key language uses, and the proficiency level descriptors are very different from what we had previously. Now, what's the same? That's a good question too, but let's keep going. Yeah, so this is a big picture. That was kind of a tricky question. Sorry about that. All right, now what's the shift here? And I've got some more information to come up. So what's the shift here? So this is where WIDA is now. Take a second and absorb that. Now let's look back and let's see where they were back in, why is this not advancing? There, in 2012. Where was WIDA in 2012? What's different? And again, hop off mute. There's not that many of us.
It looks like the difference is like communicating, when it looks like the new ones focus more on instructional purposes.
And based on the graphic and the way it's organized, what are they trying to communicate with this graphic about language for social and instructional purposes?
I think the standards remain the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the formulation of the standard is a little bit different. So we used to have language of science or social studies and blah, blah. Now we have language for, which puts more emphasis on the functional approach to language.
Yes, very nice. Ooh, very nice.
It
Yes.
also connects the language for social and instructional purposes to all the other academic standards.
Why, yes, it does. Look at that, how that it connects in. It connects in. Now, let me build on that and let me ask you one more thing here. So if we think about that, and then we also think about this. So what's the shift if we look at this? BICS versus CALP. What's the shift from BICS versus CALP to this new way of thinking?
I'm going to comment on that, Dr. Webb. It's one of my favorite topics here because I think BICS and CALP are a little bit outdated. And even though back in the day when Cummings started talking about them, meaning about different types of language, social and academic, it was a way out of that particular situation that was created in the world of language learning. And it was a way to point out that English learners back then, or multilingual learners, how we call them today, needed more support. And this was just a way to find more support for them. But today, with the functional approach to language learning, we're looking at language for different purposes. We're not looking at language, social language separately and academic language separately, because different language features actually exist in both social and academic languages, just depending on how we're using them and which language features we need.
Yes, exactly. You need the function of politely interrupting someone. You politely interrupt people in social settings, and you also need to be able to politely interrupt someone occasionally in an academic setting. And you need to be, the language, a lot of the language is the same, but in an academic setting, you might need to use some academic language along with, but it's going to have the foundation of the social and instructional purposes. Yes, thank you so much for saying that. Yes, so BICS and CALP, to me, it was an attempt, as you said, to try to tell folks, look, just because they sound proficient on the playground, everyone always used to call it the playground language, doesn't mean that they have fully developed the proficiency they need for academia. But that caused us, I think, to have a duality in our thinking. And we kind of thought, okay, we get BICS really fast, and then we go on and do the real work with language. And we developed a duality in our thinking that was wrong, a false dichotomy. And really, language is, if a functional approach understands that all language is situated in a social situation. An academic situation is just a specific kind of social situation that's involved with academic content and learning. So it's a very different thought pattern. And yet, some teachers are still astounded with the idea of BICS and CALP. So we have to figure out how we communicate this. This is a much more nuanced, the thing that was so helpful about BICS and CALP is everybody just latched onto it and, oh, now I get it. But it's more complicated than that. All right, moving on. Now, what's the shift here? 4 big ideas. What's the big shift? We kind of already tipped our hand on this one a little bit, but anybody jump in, and do not be, there's really, if you're talking to, there's not a lot of wrong answer here, because were the 4 big ideas in the 2012 like this? Nope. These ideas are new, or the putting these 4 ideas juxtaposed together in the 2020 framework is in itself a big shift. And the focus on putting these 4 ideas together in a block and saying these are the 4 big ideas, that in itself is a big, big move. And it's a pretty powerful move on WIDA's part, in my opinion. What does it say to you, the way that these ideas are presented in this graphic? And again, hop off mute. Don't be shy.
They all work hand in hand, because we as ESL teachers can't just do it as ESL teachers. We have to work together with classroom teachers and can't do it alone.
Yes. It's trying to put that out there really powerfully, because when you say Bix and Calp and everything, people have tended to say, okay, you guys go on and take care of them until they're proficient enough for us to handle them in the regular classroom. And that is not where we are today. The needs, we are in a situation where we need the language and content to be students to be learning language and content all day, every day. So we integrate language and content. The only way to have equity of opportunity and access, opportunity to learn, access to content, the path to success for students is to integrate language and content. That requires collaboration among stakeholders, and requires for us to figure out that we need to figure out what they need to use language for, and teach them to do that. Do they need to be able to ask questions about characters, about a character in fiction? Do they need to be able to describe a scientific phenomena? What do they need to be able to do? So all these 4 things together. So that's important. Now, here's what is a functional approach to language. Thank you, Dr. Terrell, for pointing me in the direction of this, of Derrida-Wianka, 1991. And I did find where you can order this text. It's not a recent text, not a recent book, but a very, very practical and interesting one. But a lot of people ask me what a functional approach to language is. And I really do like what she has to say here, talking about language that enables us to do certain things. All right. And thinking about doing certain things. Sorry about that, you guys. I didn't know that my cell phone was not on silent. And you can see, I'm not going to read the screen to you, different things that it enables us to do. Keep those things in mind, because we're coming up on another shift in the standards to the key language uses, which are now much more aligned with the way language is used in the content areas. It's real life, real purposes, emphasizes meaning and how language helps us construct meaning. It helps us, again, language is part of how we make sense of the world. It's not simply descriptive, it's part of the process of problem solving, of learning, of making meaning. And I've got an extra bullet in there, sorry about that, but it is not concerned with, quote unquote, a set of rules which prescribe correct and incorrect usage. So conventions are not paramount. Interesting. What does that have to say when conventions are paramount in many of our content standards? Just keep that in mind. Language is dynamic, it's ever evolving. And also it's got to be, when language works and it is functional, when it actually helps us meet our needs. All right, so that's a definition. There are many other definitions. We could look at Michael Halliday's work, but this is a definition of functional approach to language that will help us wrap our brain around it. Does anybody else have some things to say or insights to share about what a functional approach to language is that will help us, again, wrap our brain around functional versus teaching about language? Anybody else? What's a functional approach to language? How do you understand it? Do you have a favorite definition or insight from a researcher? And if not, it's okay. But if you do, I'd love to hear.
Dr. Webb, you mentioned Holiday. So his most famous statement about functional approach to language is probably that language construes reality, it doesn't just describe reality. So I mean, you were saying that just in, in a different way. So that is probably my favorite one. And then again, it's all a matter of with the structural approach to language, which we're very familiar with, and it doesn't go away anywhere. It stays in all the approaches and methods of teaching foreign languages as well as ESOL are not disappearing, but functional approach to language and new WIDA standards framework is more like guidelines and very general view, giving us a more general direction, which we still can use all the other approaches, but this one is all about the purpose of language. What can we do with the language?
Thank you. Thank you, Olga. I appreciate that. And I love, that is a great quote. Say it again.
So it's language construes reality.
Language construes reality. Yes, yes, exactly. And if you think about that, the way you organize, language is organized, the organization of the language or languages that you speak is how you understand the world, construe reality, and the organization and the way of that language then forms that to a certain degree. So every language would then have its own inherent perspectives, biases, probably based on how the language developed the place and the products and the physical terrain of the place where the language developed. So it's fascinating to think about these things. And I'm not a applied linguist. I'm just a language educator who is fascinated by all these things, but just fantastic to think about it. So functional approach. So how language enables us to do things, how language enables us to construe reality and to understand and make meaning. Okay, now let's get to the 4 key language uses. So getting to that functional approach, here are some functions, uses: narrate and argue, inform, and explain. Let's just for a second match. I haven't matched them up for you. So what description matches to explain? Somebody come off mute and tell me which one of these is explaining. And take a minute because you need to read.
Would explain be to give an account of how things work and why things happen?
Makes sense to me. What do you guys think? Give an account of how things work or why things happen to substantiate the inner workings of natural, man-made, and social phenomenon. So to explain something, all right? In that case, what's inform?
The second one, to convey information, to define, describe, compare, contrast.
All right. Okay. Very good. Then in that case, what's narrate?
Convey real or imaginary experiences through stories, histories, to instruct, entertain, teach, or support.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Head. I appreciate that. Yep. And then finally, to argue is?
Justifying the claim using evidence.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. So those are the 4 key language uses. And if you haven't yet dug into the WIDA standards, one thing that you'll find out is as you go through the key language uses and you dig into them, they define which ones are the primary language uses by the academic content area: English language arts, math, science, social studies, the standards, the language of math, of English language arts, math, science, and social studies, and also by grade level. So, what would you think would be a predominant key language use for kids in kindergarten? Would they be arguing? Of course, we always know kindergartners love to argue with their moms about things. No, Mom, I can have a popsicle, but not in necessarily school maybe yet. What are they going to do in kindergarten mostly?
So primarily that would be inform,
Mhm.
maybe a little bit of narration.
Yep, they will narrate and they will inform. Exactly. They will tell us, tell us. And they may tell us some stories too. And that shifts. It shifts according to the content area and the grade level. Now, let me also pull up the guiding principles of language development. Go back to that first shift we looked at from English learners or English language learners to multilingual learners. Here in the guiding principles of language development, WIDA put some meat on the bones in terms of just doubling down on multilingual learners, languages, and culture as resources to be leveraged. And they say this is number one principle. And really, a lot of the other statements are outgrowths of number one, that their culture and their languages are resources to be leveraged. To be leveraged. That means we have to know what their languages and cultures are. We have to have some understanding of language and culture. And that means that content teachers who are just teaching ELs with no idea of what language and culture they come from are handicapped in that they are not accessing these valuable resources. So that brings us a challenge because in our current reality, how do we share that information? How do we get that information? And how do we ensure that our content teachers are getting that information? A key principle of good teaching is always know your learners, but it is really interesting to think about how to make culture and language visible at the level it needs to be visible for our content teachers, especially at middle and high school, where they may only have the students for an hour once a day, and they may have 150 students. That's interesting. And it's good, and it presents an ongoing challenge that we have to kind of try to wrap our brains around. And then you can see there that it goes on about developing their multiple languages, enhances knowledge and cultural base. It develops over time. That's an important thing. WIDA is very explicit that language learning is not just a linear development. It develops over time, and it is variable. Language, cognitive development, and social emotional development are all interrelated. And I'm not, again, going to read everything on this page, but this is an important piece. The guiding principles provide us with some really important things to think about. It's also interesting to think about how we can empower students, even when we do not speak the language or languages they speak, how we can empower them to do what's called for in number 9, which is use their full linguistic repertoire. And thinking about that in the context of the classroom today, where kids hopefully in many situations do have excellent access to technology, how can we make sure that they're able to access content and make sense of the world, through trained languaging practices, and also, reach their full potential in terms of language development. Now, teacher dispositions. This is something that Landa pointed out. She was kind enough to share her notes with me, and I have incorporated as much as I could. And she pointed out that we really need to consider our teacher dispositions as we consider the shifts we need to make. And we need to think about what paradigms we have been in, what our usual go-to often used strategies are. Are we folks who tend to fall back on questioning, as a form of teaching? And if so, how much language are we eliciting from students and how much are we simply providing? What kind of opportunities are we giving for our students to do what Olga said, use language to construe the world and to construct meaning and to construct, understanding? So, and Landa points out here that we need to intentionally think past, oh, I already do that, because we probably don't, not to the level that we need to be doing it. So we need to be innovative, we need to be creative, and we need to really think about how we're going to move forward and use the standards, the proficiency level descriptors, which I haven't even delved into. I'm not even going to get to delve into them very much in this short presentation. But again, we have a whole series coming up, so you get to delve into different standards in different upcoming presentations. So teachers are supposed to use the WIDA 2020 framework for these things. And this is going to harken back to the big ideas. Collaborate with colleagues around the integration of language and content. Again, 4 big ideas, and 2 of them are collaboration and integration of language and content, along with equity and along with the functional approach. Partner to coordinate that learning, so that what's going on over here in math and what's going on in science and what's going on in that English language development classroom all are working together so the student is moving along. We want to model the kind of products, projects, and performances that are going to show that the kids are making progress in their language learning. Notice the products, projects, and performances, and think back to that functional definition of language. How do we get our students engaged in projects, products, and performances, and not simply in learning language for the sake of language? We want to monitor their growth, assess their growth. And I notice in the data in our own district that we and this is normal, there's a gap between receptive skills and expressive skills. But we focus so much on reading, which is important. You've got to be able to read to be able to learn, but you also have to be able to write and to speak. And developing that phonological awareness of the English language through active listening and speaking is key to being a good reader and a good writer. And we have to have all 4 skills. There's big gaps, at least that we see in general, between how strong students will be in listening, but then isn't anywhere near as strong in their writing. They're incredibly strong quite often in their reading, and they're not as strong. Not as strong in their writing, and very strong in their speaking and their listening, but not as strong in their speaking. So those expressive domains. And then we want to get back to our families and our students and say, hey, this is where you are, and this is where we want you to go. We want you to improve your language up to the next level by using it to do these kind of things and giving us more language. So all that said, here's the student-centered paradigm. Sorry, I said student-centered and I meant teacher-centered. Here's the teacher-centered paradigm. And here is where we have been trying to go for a while, but the WIDA standards are really pushing us hard to get there. The student and language-centered paradigm. So what kind of things do we need to be doing in our classrooms to enact this paradigm? And that is a question, that's a discussion I'd like to have with you guys. I'd like to just pause. What do we need to do in our classrooms to get to a paradigm where our classroom instruction is student and language centered? Learning languages, and when I say language centered, language is a central part of how they are constructing meaning. Maybe I should have said student-centered and language-rich. Horace?
Yes, this is something that I know that in my district that we're getting ready to implement more. Just we call it busy talk, more collaboration, more of a chance to just talk about what did you do today? And I'm sorry, my dog is why I want to stay muted. And just we've gone to elevation, which is going to be awesome, which is, have those moments to where we can just pull out a module and allow the kids to just talk. For instance, a monologue, just to talk about spaghetti. And of course, things like that nature. Just, I mean, talking is what we said. We want to have busy talk, noise, and just collaborate, and just have. And then the other part of that is more focus time on allowing students to listen to themselves speak, because that was a big part of when we had kids that were doing everything on access testing, 5 point something, but then it came to listening. 0.2. I mean, speaking 0.2.
Wow.
Those kind of things. So this is huge for us.
Great. That is, yes. And Elevation does a great job of putting strategies out there for us to use. And I think what the strategy you're referencing now in Elevation is the I am monologues.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
and
ma'am.
What I love about the I am monologues is the way that it engages the students in talking and making sense and talking about their identity, or they can take on another identity, whatever they want to do, depending on the content. And you can change the content based on you can change the purpose of it based on the content you're trying to teach. You can have them take on a different perspective or their own perspective. They can speak, they can write. So that's a great example of a strategy that helps kids construct meaning and use language for a functional approach. So that's a great example. I love it. Other folks out there who can give us an example of how we need to make this paradigm shift. What are some things that we can be doing? Remember, social and instructional language is no longer to the side. It's the underpinning of everything. So it doesn't always have to be you don't have to come up with a purely academic task here.
I have an interesting observation, Dr. Webb. As ESOL teachers, we have push in and pull out models. And when you push in with the teacher, you have the luxury of listening and observing what is the classroom teachers doing. And I believe what I hear most of the time is teachers saying, well, I have to squeeze in this standard and I have to teach this standard. They're being so wrapped up with making sure that the report card has like all the checks that they don't even have time to think about, okay, how can I actively engage a student in a fun activity that will actually make them speak? And then in May, when everyone is done, they have more luxury of have more fun. And my favorite, the third grade teachers are doing teacher of the day, where the students get a hat of being a teacher and they teach a lesson of whatever, how to do a bracelet or how to do an origami. And this is where you really see kids using that language and being proud of themselves. And the teachers are way more relaxed and everyone is enjoying it, versus throughout the year, you're like, okay, this standard, let's move this to this standard. And like people just forget that you can relax and do some things outside of the box.
Right, right. Well, and the thing that I think happens is that the way that we test has determined and has caused us to, has had a profound, and to my thinking, often not a positive effect on how we teach. And we sometimes look at teaching, we teach standards in isolation. Most standards, English language arts, if we think of language, including if you're talking about ESOL, but let's talk about English language arts. English language arts, if you're learning how to write an argumentative essay, you're using it to use, that's a functional approach. You're going to argue to achieve a certain purpose, and you're probably going to argue in a certain content area. Now, you may choose to focus on fictional, a fictional work, in which case your content is English language arts, but you might not. You might choose to write a paper about a social studies topic or a mathematics topic or a scientific topic. So considering the fact that we could do so much more integration of our content, and I hear quite often there are many laments from our friends in science and social studies that their subjects are not taught to the degree that they would like them taught. And this is something I've heard from years overall in Georgia and beyond, because we focus so much on math and English language arts. So what if we were to take this functional approach towards language further and say, again, how do we use the student's application? How do we do a presentation and get them involved with content and language? Again, it's not so that the teacher has to cover, because if my problem is if the teacher's sitting there just covering it and doing a lecture on it, the students are not really learning it, because they learn it through the application. An instructional framework is a short teacher lesson and then student application and student practice, but that student application and practice gets given such short shrift. So I think that's where we can move our focus. That's why listening is so high, right? So Sasha, I think you're exactly right. How do we shift that? And that is maybe more than anything else what I'm hoping we can come out with the rest of the series, and with having the DOE people leading it. How do we move the dime to say, guys, if language is how we make meaning, and if language is how we construe the world, then how do we get that across, that we have got to get kids time to work through this content and apply this learning, and to learn about a phenomenon, or wonder or inquire about a phenomenon in the science and social studies classes, to problem solve in mathematics classes. I mean, you're spot on. The shift is beyond English learners, in my opinion. The shift is beyond English learners. It's a huge shift we need to make, that is, in order to have quality instruction for all learners. And think about all the kids who are not English learners technically, because, but they have lower language skills than they would have had due to the last few years with some of the isolation that's happened due to COVID-19. And some of that's come at really critical times for our young learners. Other folks, what else can we do? What other kind of strategies would we like to see? I have a couple picked out. I didn't go to Elevation because I know not everybody has Elevation. I went to the good old go-to strategies that we printed, and I was picking out content learning logs to help kids summarize their learning and writing, and being able to, because I also thought that was one that would fit well with content teachers who are sometimes focused on content a lot, and they don't give kids time to necessarily summarize. But I also was thinking about the dialogue journals. David Chiesa did a great presentation at Georgia TESOL in the fall about dialogic journals and getting kids dialoguing through writing and achieve. So I love that. What else could we possibly use? Anybody have any other suggestions? There's many, many, many things I know.
This is Valerie. I am an English language.
One of the things that I saw that Landa had highlighted in her notes was just the idea of just giving kids choices and getting them to take sides in a debate on a not necessarily highly consequential topic, but using their language to argue for the advantages of, school buses over public transportation to get to school. And obviously you have to start off and build up the language for them to do that. But, once they can describe a school bus and they can talk about how they get to school, well, what's the disadvantage of us all taking cars to school instead of riding the bus? If I ride the bus, it might take me an hour to get to school. I can get there in 15 minutes in my car. But if we all drive cars, what are the disadvantages? kids can be talking about things that are real life things that are going to, and we all argue about things like that. How do we improve our world?
There's a lot of
Here
technology.
is again, and this is from the CEFR. This is from the Common European Framework of Reference, and Landa had included this in her notes. And I really do think that she was spot on when she put this in here, because it connects right back to what we're doing here with the 2020 WIDA framework. This is putting learners central in the process, and extensive language use in the classroom. Not learning about the language, but how to use it, letting them use all of their linguistic resources, and the purposeful collaborative task in the classroom. And I love the fact that they call out here, the primary purpose is not language. Some other product is out or outcome. So I was at a STEAM school, one of our elementary schools, that is a science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics focused school. And the kids were designing almost like a periscope. And they had to do all the design, and they had to discuss it, and they had to use the materials. They're all, when we get kids involved in hands-on performance-based activities or products or performances or projects, those 3 Ps, that is where we can look and find our purpose. Another great P is, again, phenomenon for science and social studies. What's the phenomenon of human migration? What causes human migration? Who migrates, where and why, and under what circumstances? What problems does it solve? What problems does it cause? Well, that's a huge issue of our time on every continent. This is a huge issue of our time. How great to get our kids engaged in a discussion of this when many of them have families, either they have themselves or their families have been majorly impacted by migration, because they themselves may have migrated here from some different country due to circumstances. So, and I think that is all of my content for slides for today. So what I want to do now is just open it up for questions and discussion. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see all of you, and we can kind of have a little bit better dialogue, because it's hard to have great dialogue when I'm sharing the screen. So with that out there, we've got some time before we have to wrap it up. What is your thinking? What are you wondering? What are your challenges?
Dr. Webb, can you
Sandy,
hear us? We had few
you see your
people
hand up.
getting off the microphone, but I don't think you heard people talking.
Yeah, there were a couple people that
Sandy, you're
started
on
asking
mute.
questions, and then you may not have heard them.
Oh, you took your hand down?
No, you can't hear any of us. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Can y'all hear her?
Yeah, everybody else can.
Uh-oh, what happened? This is interesting.
Well, I would say, Sandy, if you want to ask your question.
Somebody say something.
It wasn't a
Dr.
question, it was just a comment that I'm at work in technology, and although it's still a challenge, I think, for teachers to be using technology, there's so much opportunity, as you began to learn during COVID, but we've been working in technology for many years, and there are programs out there that can foster the type of discussion and interaction and lessons that can be brought into the classroom from the technology, that I think we go over in trainings, but there's a plethora of material that can, again, create discussion in the classroom, that it's not just a matter of the kids sitting with the headphones and doing the speaking and listening. It also develops that language on a one-on-one with the computer in
Mhm.
person, but it can also be brought out into the classroom as well. It's just a thought I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Yes, and I did miss some of the start of that. I think it happened because I accidentally put my WIDA standards. I'm going to blame it on the WIDA standards framework because I think I put it down on my little microphone thing and it muted me or muted everybody. Anyway,
think
I'm
there was
blaming it on WIDA.
Valerie Flug, I think, also had wanted to speak before.
Yes, Valerie, please go ahead.
Oh, I wrote my comment in the chat. It was just when you were asking for activities, because I'm a English language arts teacher, but my master's is in ESOL, so I do like ESOL, ELA, and I use that PSYOP activities book constantly. I find it so much more accessible in some ways than the PSYOP manual that explains the aspects of PSYOP. One of my favorites is something in there called what's it called? It's called the Find Someone Who review. And it's just simply reviewing anything you want to discuss. Like we did it with The Great Gatsby a while ago. And I always add pictures to it, but the kids are just walking around and they have to talk to, if there are 10 questions, they have to talk to 10 different people. And it gets them up, they walk around. Again, you don't have to include photos, but I often do as like a little hint. But I just love that in terms of like, just, them helping each other. And I usually play two because inevitably there's one question that's really hard and they don't know what it is. So if I play, someone asks me the question and then they get the answer. And it's so fun to see them then turn around and give it to someone else. And thus it continues. So I love that book. It's like dog-eared and raggedy, but it's awesome. So
I love that. That's a great recommendation. If somebody's got a second, find that on Amazon or something and stick it in the chat. That's fantastic. And I love that. And that's one thing that when I was an old world language teacher, just changing up the social format so that every day the kids they listened, they spoke, they read, and they wrote. So they did all four things every day. And you can get them up. I used to call it in German Multipartnerarbeit. So you had to get up and do multiple, and they just knew anytime I said that they had to do, I could do it on the fly. I could say, stand up, write these 3 questions on your paper, make yourself a grid on your paper, stand up and talk to 5 partners and see what they think about these 5 questions. And then they had to then come back and paraphrase what their partners had said when they're reporting out. But it increases the amount of time that the kids are speaking, and it decreases the amount of time the teacher's speaking. So how do we get kids doing more than one thing at once? Not just listening to the teacher, but listening and writing, or speaking with a partner, speaking and writing when they're working with a partner, or reading and writing, or, how do we get them to practice at least 2 skills at once as they're processing language and doing something to achieve a certain purpose? I mean, I just love this. Christina, thank you. You're so welcome to be a part. We're so glad to have you be a part of this. And Meg Baker from Argent DOE was here. And I believe, and if I get your pronunciation on your name wrong, please correct me, but is it, because I just have heard it, I think once, but is it Yana Parrott, who is new with the Georgia DOE? I see you on. Have I said your name? Have I completely massacred the pronunciation? Please correct me. Ms. Parrott has just joined the DOE, and she is going to be one of our presenters coming up. So I'm really excited, and she may not have hurried.
I apologize.
No worries.
I was in another. I was kind of like in another meeting, but it's Gina.
Gina.
Yes. So,
wonderful.
But I didn't want to miss this presentation. It was something that I wanted to attend, so I kind of like made some room.
Well, I'm so excited. I'm really honored that you did. I'm very much. And and Valerie's put the link to that book into the chat. It looks like thriftbooks.com is going to get some traffic after this. And I appreciate all the comments in the chat, you guys. This is just, trying to make sense of this in a way. It's not, the WIDA standards are something that you're going to dive into. If we understand the purpose, the overall purpose, and how they're constructed, and what we're trying to do. Then when we're having those conversations and, we're talking to teachers situated in the moment, what are you trying to teach? Are you trying to teach animal adaptations as a part of your 4th grade science curriculum? Okay, what language? What is the content? What's the language? How are we going to teach the kids to do what they need to do? How are we going to teach them to formulate questions about animal adaptations? And how are we going to get them to be able to have the language to posit, to make hypotheses, and to then, seek evidence for their hypothesis that would prove it or disprove it, and then state whether their hypothesis was true or false based on that? How are we going to get them to do that? If they can do that, but they need a whole lot of social language too, they need to be able to say, I respectfully disagree with your hypothesis, which all goes back to conversation, social and instructional language, right? Anyway,
Yeah.
well, it's been a great dialogue.
I think they're with the Brenzi, if I'm pronouncing Brenzi, and Barbie. I think you have your hand up, so if you want to go ahead.
Oh, please go ahead.
Hi, this may be a bad question or a question for another time. Maybe I just need to do more professional development on the new standard. But I feel like when I heard the narrate, argue, the 4 things we went over in the beginning, and I look at those things in the content areas of the new descriptors, it's kind of hard for me to like picture that happening, let's say in a math classroom, or like I've seen the standards and I've used them, but it's like, is there somewhere to see some of this in action?
So yes, I think you can there's definitely some places you can see this in action. I think though that the whole thing that is happening is that content teachers tend to teach the content the way they always have, and ESOL teachers are coming in saying, let's look at how you can teach the kids, actively teach the language. And whether it's doing something as simple as pre-teaching vocabulary that needs to happen in order for your lower proficiency kids to be able to participate and to understand, what's going on. I would say that for me, where I think the rubber is going to meet the road is going to be when we get into looking at the language expectations by standard, so English, language arts, math, science, and social studies, and grade level. And we look at those expectations, and then we look at the content. And I think when we look at the content that teachers are trying to teach, and we think, what is it that students need to be able to do with language? Because again, if teachers any teacher can choose not to change, can choose to stay in that old teacher-centered paradigm. But that doesn't meet the needs of any learners that I know of today. And it really never has. I mean, ever since I've been in education, we've been saying, don't just tell it to me, let me do it actively so I can learn it. And that really is, the WIDA standards are very much in that spirit, that students need to be actively using language to accomplish tasks and using language to learn content and to make meaning. So I think what we have to do is, and sometimes it might be easiest, Brincy, one thing I'm seeing, might be easiest to start with strategies that are language rich and look at those. Elevation is one way to do that. That was mentioned already by Horace earlier in the presentation, that looking at the strategy and saying, what do I need to do? And again, for those of you who don't have elevation, an old school way to do it is, and they're not out there anymore, but I have a copy. If anybody wants them, I can give you the PDF. Before we started with using elevation, we were printing out hard copies of go-to strategies so that folks could look and see by proficiency level and by skill what strategies were suggested for them to use to support their English learners in accessing content. So I'd be glad to put that in the chat. I know I promised I'd put the presentation in there, so I can put the go-to strategies in there as well. but I think it's not, the standards are not, they're not monolithic. You know, we have to take it one bit at a time. And just as much, if we have the general understanding, then we can use it as a kind of a handbook, and we're going to learn as we go. You would love a copy of the go-to? Okay, I will do that. Before I log off, I will put it in the chat. So I think you guys, if I put it in the chat, can they get to it after the meeting's over, Brian, or will we need to email it out to everybody afterwards?
Yeah, I imagine that's the way I was thinking, either that, or if you want to maybe embed the link in your slides or something.
Okay, I can try to do that. Let me try to do that too. All right. And Brian, I know you need to close out. It's 6:30 and everything. I am going to go try to hunt for those links, and then I will stop the recording really quickly. So let me stop the recording.
Well, I have one more question.
Sure.
I can't attend the